not only as a Black person, Black youth growing up in America, not only are you only seeing people look like you succeed at the highest levels in sports and entertainment, but it's shaped the entire perception of what Black people are capable of, like that we're only capable of doing these things. And so, so that's why I'm doing Pinnacle Code, to show the brilliance that we have, that the heights that we're achieving in various fields outside of sports and entertainment. And even me, just being in close proximity to Black athletes, knowing some of the great things that they're doing outside of their job. You can have this career, but also build up your own platform on the side. And I think that's so important to do, whether you look at it as a side hustle, whether you want to go all in on it at some point in the future. I think it's really important, for people that look like us to understand that you don't need to be boxed in.
Turn this up, turn this up.
Your professional development is one of the keys to your career success. When you combine your desire to grow with actionable steps, your journey to success becomes an incredible reality.
Hi, I'm Paul Paranbi, and welcome to Incredible Leadership, where we learn how to become the most incredible versions of ourselves by learning from each other. Today, I have the honor of having Ben Arthur on the show. He's a Seattle native and Ghanaian American, and he's a journalist and podcaster based out of Nashville, Tennessee. He's a host of Pinnacle Code, an independent show that spotlights high achievers in the Black community beyond athletes and entertainers. So that was just a little bit about you, Ben, but can you introduce yourself the way you would do it?
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, Paul. I'm glad we were able to connect, a week or two ago. So thank you so much for having me. What would I add? Well, as far as being a journalist, my day job essentially is covering the NFL for Fox Sports. So based out of Nashville, I'm covering the AFC South division for those familiar with the NFL. So that means the Tennessee Titans, which obviously are here in Nashville, and then also the Indianapolis Colts, Houston Texans, Jacksonville Jaguars, and the Houston Texans. So those are the four teams that I cover. And yeah, I think you kind of hit everything else. The Pinnacle Code show that I've recently gotten going, and Ghanaian American. Yeah, I think you got it. I think you got it.
It sounds like I might have introduced you a little bit too well. That's what it sounds like.
That's exactly what it is, because I don't know what else to add to it.
So that's on me. So I think most people on the show probably know, but I'm Nigerian. So when we met, I was like, we're African brothers between Nigeria and Ghana.
Even though we have our rivalries when it comes to jollof rice or
I was just going to say that we're not going to talk about jollof rice, and I'm not going to talk about eggs or anything like that, because it can get spicy pretty quick.
For sure.
For sure. But no, I'm really happy to have you on the show. And I know you talked a little bit about what you do, like covering the NFL as a journalist, the AFC South. So how does that work for Fox Sports? So I know you say you cover a lot of different teams. Does that mean a lot of travel? Like how does that actually work, covering all these different teams?
Yeah, so it is a lot of travel, right? Because I'm in Nashville, so I could be around the Titans a lot, but because I cover three other teams, the Texans, Jags, and Colts, I make trips to Indianapolis and to Jacksonville and to Houston, particularly like during the season, during games. When the games are going on, regular season and playoffs. Like this season, for instance, the 2024 season is right around the corner. At the time of this recording, training camp for the Texans is actually already started. For my other three teams, it's next week. But yeah, I'll be going to Houston a lot this season, just because for any of your viewers who may be NFL fans, the Texans are kind of like probably the most hyped team in the NFL right now, right? Like Super Bowl contender, just with CJ Stroud and all that. So because I work for a national outlet, a national audience really cares about that storyline. So probably of all my teams, I'll probably, outside of living in Nashville, I'll be in Houston the most, just because our readers, our audience cares a lot about that team from a national perspective. And I think that's maybe the biggest thing that separates my coverage from other people, right? Because you can have like NFL beat reporters who cover one individual team and they serve one particular audience. But because I work for a national platform like Fox Sports, they care about a national audience. Like what are, from a national NFL perspective, what are the things that people are talking about? And so for my team, for my teams, the Texans are kind of like the team that my bosses, the people who oversee me kind of want me to focus on. So, so yeah, like I travel for games. I don't go to every game, but I travel for games. So I'll be there up in the press box, writing during the game, tweeting out commentary, post game. I'm writing. I'm going down to the locker room to interview players, to do the post game press conference with the coaches and the quarterback or whoever comes at the podium, and writing analysis. So my work is mainly featured on foxsports.com. And so you'll see all my written work there. But we also have a NFL on Fox podcast. So I'm a regular contributor on that show. So so like when they want to talk about the Texans or any one of the AFC South storylines that are kind of making national waves, they'll kind of have me on it, and I'll do like a hit, like a 20-minute hit or something like that. So that's how that usually goes. I'm not on our traditional like linear broadcast channels, at least not yet. I want to do more of that at some point. But as for right now, my written work, it's like foxsports.com and then also doing the podcast. So yeah, there's a lot that comes with the job, a lot of travel during the season. So from like late July, basically to the Super Bowl in February, that's like my busy season, right? Wow. So yeah, there's kind of a lot that goes with it, but it's a lot of fun. And at the end of the day, I'm telling stories around football. Like it's a really fun thing to do. So yeah.
Stories around football and just being an overall storyteller. Is that what got you into journalism, or did you always know you want to be a journalist? Kind of like taking a step back to Ben Arthur as a kid, high school, college. Is this something you always saw yourself doing, or how did that kind of evolve? Yeah,
I think like a lot of kids growing up here, I wanted to be a professional athlete. But when that didn't really work out for me, it was a storytelling. Reporting was another way for me to still stay close to the games I love. And then I think everyone kind of has like their God-given talent, so to speak, that you're maybe called to like develop and whatnot. And just with my writing ability, my ability to listen, like just for interviews, and then also just delivering messages like with my voice. Like I just found it, and the feedback I would get from people is like, this is something that I'm kind of meant to do, using my voice, using my pen, so to speak, to tell stories. And so I think for me, I was able to combine the love of sports with also this God-given talent I had. But I think for me, and this is a really big part of who I am as a journalist, is telling like the stories of the people in the game, not necessarily. I mean, my job, of course, is to like cover the games, and you have the stats, the wins and the losses that come with that. But I've always been most drawn to like who these people are, like the guys you see scoring touchdowns. Like what is the culture or the environment that nurtured who they are today, and created the kind of person you see today, or the culture around the game, like those bigger macro stories within sports, within football, that I think transcend sports. And so for me, that's kind of always been the thing I've been most drawn to.
Yeah. Like And I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about is like the culture and how people were raised and how that leads into what they become as an athlete. So it's really cool that you're able to use your voice or your pen, as you said, or your computer, your technology to share those stories.
Yeah, exactly. It's I would say it's like a tremendous privilege too, right? Because a lot of times when you're telling these guys or gals their stories, like there's a lot of trust that's involved, right? Like you need that's why relationships, like any business, and I know for just from what you do, like relationships are everything. So you need to get to a point to where these people, you know, you may be telling their life story or what they went through, but they need to be able to trust you. And so that's where I think being in the locker room really plays a big role in that, right? Like having conversations with them and them seeing you on a regular basis, not you just coming up to them whenever you need something and stuffing a recorder in their face, right? Actually having a conversation with them and getting to know them and them getting to know you. Like it's like anything, right? Like in business or any other career, like I think the best work, or in my case, the best stories come from when you can build that trust and have a solid foundation of a relationship to start from.
Yeah, absolutely. Building the trust, building the relationship. And this is Incredible Paul leadership. Mm-hmm. And some people might be wondering, like, how does this tie into leadership? And of course, I'm going to tie it into leadership. Like when you talk about building relationships, there's a really good quote that says people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And what you're saying right there is that not just only seeking to get stories and seeking to like, what are you trying to get out of it, but really painting the person in a good light and having their stories come out as opposed to just what you want to come out. And I think that is critical in what you do. It's also critical as leaders in building those relationships. Because I had a recent talk I gave on leadership and talked about the importance of building relationships and not necessarily being like you have to be best friends with your people, but understanding what are the things that are driving them, what are their aspirations, their dreams, their visions. And so you can tap into that and see how it relates to what your company, what your business, what you want to do as a leader, and that just accelerates your growth.
Absolutely. And just kind of like another part of it too, just like from my perspective, being a journalist, building relationships, like the interview process is like a big part of that too, right? Because you have to be able to listen, right? Because I think a lot of times with an interview, like you get so caught up with just, okay, I asked them this question. Okay, they answered. Let me go to this question. Okay, let me go here. Like you need to listen to exactly like, yeah, that's, I think that's a huge part of communication and leadership and being able to listen, to actively listen to what someone is saying, like coming, and a lot of times coming from a place of curiosity, picking up on what they're saying, how they're saying it, like maybe someone's voice got a little bit quieter or they were more hesitant to talk about a certain thing. So you kind of see, okay, why is that, right? So I think there are so many different layers to it as well. But yeah, you kind of have to bring that all in to get the best, I guess, the best communication experience possible. So.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about communication, what I'm thinking of is a lot of times when we say communication, we think about just us communicating to other people. But I'm really glad that you mentioned active listening, because I always say this because it's true, but it's also kind of funny. But my mom always told me I have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You listen more than I speak. And so I'm curious, like, obviously in journalism, being an active listener is critical, but I didn't know if there was a point that you just, like, you were always good at it, or you just naturally progressed, or was there a point that you're like, I am not a good listener and I'm learning to be a good listener? Or was this something that you kind of had some natural aptitude and just got a little bit better?
Yeah, Paul, it's a constant growth process, right? Like I'm not a finished product in that regard. I still, even though I've been a professional journalist for 7 years now, it's not like it's still that I'm like perfect in that regard. There are plenty of times when I have interviews and I didn't maybe pick up on something during the actual conversation, but when I'm trying to write the story and I'm transcribing the interview, they said something that I didn't necessarily pick up on, and then I have to go back to the person, go back to the subject, and ask about that. So it's a constant process. You can always get better at it. I'm not a finished product in that regard. As I said, I'm definitely a lot better at it, right, than when I was first coming out of college, right? Because I think for me, so just for context for you and for your listeners, so after graduating from college, my first job was in Laredo, Texas, which is on the Mexican border, like a border town.
Oh, wow.
And so it wasn't a high profile job by any means. I'm covering mainly high school guys. There's a AAA team that also happened to play across the border in Mexico. It was a binational AAA team.
Oh, wow.
And so that was like the highest profile team I covered. And then my next job right after that was covering the Seattle Seahawks with guys making millions of dollars. And so for me, like at first, I would definitely say I was more nervous going into these interviews. And I think some of those bad habits in the beginning would come out where, okay, I have all these questions. I need to make sure I hit this, and this instead of really just listening. And so once I kind of got over that, you realize they're just normal people. You just have a normal conversation and you just kind of get better at it over time. So,
are you wondering what's next? Has everything you tried failed? Or maybe you just feel stuck? Then coaching might be right for you. The coaching relationship is a relationship totally centered on you. If you're tired of running on the hamster wheel of life and want to start to see results, reach out to Incredipaul for help. So what are you waiting for? Go to incredipaul.org/coaching. incredipaul.org/coaching, or at I am Incredipaul on all my socials. Or you can click the link in the bio for your free coaching session. I want to make sure you become the most incredible version of yourself. Absolutely. So what was the time frame? Like, how long were you in Laredo before you moved to Seattle?
Yeah, so it was actually pretty quick. I got
really
pretty quick, and obviously I didn't plan it that way. I mean, I didn't want to stay in Laredo forever, but I was there for only 6 months. Before.
Oh wow!
It was really, it was really, really quick, and I actually thought I was going to leave after 3 or 4 months because there was another job that I thought I was going to get. I didn't ultimately get that, but
okay.
But yeah, it was just 6 months. It was pretty quick.
6 months, and then you went from there. So just so I understand, my listeners understand, you went from there covering high school sports, and then occasionally like the local AAA team, binational team, to covering the Seattle Seahawks.
Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah, it was a big transition. I will say Seattle. The Seahawks were like 90% of my job. The other 10% was covering the other major sports in Seattle. And so that'd be the Seattle Storm. So that, I mean, they've been historically a WNBA powerhouse. The Washington Huskies, who are kind of a major, Division I program. So I would cover them as well. And then also at that time, the Seattle Kraken, Seattle's NHL team, hadn't quite formed. So a lot of my reporting was about the expansion and the city bracing for the Kraken. So I will say I did cover some other things, but 90% of my job was the Seahawks. I was at training camp.
Wow.
I was at all the home games. I was interviewing like Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson was with the Seahawks still at the time, all these guys. And so yeah, it was quite the transition. It was quite the transition.
Yeah, that seems like a really big transition. Like, not only the job you're doing, but then even just the part of the country you're living in,
Mm-hmm.
to go from South Texas, border town, to Seattle. Yeah, talk to me
Exactly.
more about. It seems like that was more of a transition. So I'm interested to hear, like, how did you transition to the area? Like, get connected with the people. Like, how did you go about building relationships, I guess?
Well, I guess I'll kind of talk about both sides of that. So I'm originally from Seattle. So going to Seattle,
Okay.
going back to Seattle wasn't that difficult. Like I
Okay.
lived with my family when I got back. So
Mhm.
the transition wasn't that bad. The transition was going to Laredo. That was the
Okay.
because yeah, it's just a completely different culture, Paul. Like, first of all, it's like 99% Mexican. First of all, it's like a Mexican city in the U.S. So I stuck out like a sore thumb. There are like six black people that live there, and it's actually
Wow.
small as people think. There are 300,000 people who live in Laredo.
Wow.
So yeah, I was one of very few black people in that environment. There weren't a lot of white people, Asian. It was just like Mexican. Because I literally lived where I stayed was 5 minutes from the literal international border. So
Wow.
so yeah, a lot of people had families on the other side in Nuevo Laredo. So it forced being in an environment like that where you don't have any family, you're far away from home, your first job out of school, it forces you to grow. Like it's
Yeah.
like it kind of shows you like how bad do you want it, right? Because I wasn't making any money. Um,
Mm.
I was apart from my family, loved ones, like I said. I was just working because I knew where I wanted to go. I knew it was just a stepping stone for me, and the plus being in an environment like that is like you get to do everything. There are so many. The people are not only welcome, like they want the coverage, right? They want to be able to, like the aunts and uncles, they want to show that their little nephew made the all county football team or whatever. Like there's a sense of pride that comes with that. So a lot of people were really
Absolutely.
open and whatnot, but there are just so many different things to cover. Like in a lot of times in big cities, you may be siloed into covering one or two things, but being in an environment like that, you get to see what you like and what you don't like. You're covering golf, you're covering football, you're covering soccer, you're covering AAA baseball. There was a women's football league I covered, and they played
Oh,
at
wow.
parks just around South Texas, just like where you would see families taking their kids, like they would, and they would like paint like the hash marks.
Oh,
You know,
wow.
it's like, yeah. So you get so that's why I'm grateful for that experience, because that's where you learn how to be a real reporter. Um, so, uh, so yeah, I mean, it was a unique experience. The only black person there, really, but the people were really kind. I mean,
Okay.
Hispanic, Latino, like I love their like the culture, and I think
Mhm.
as well, just being Nigerian, being African, like the sense of family for us is really important, and like for
Yes.
Mexicans, like that's huge, that's everything. You treat them with respect, they'll treat you with respect back, and the food was fantastic, as you can
I'll
imagine.
just say.
The best Mexican food ever, living down there. So it was difficult for sure, but at the end of the day, I am really grateful for my time down there, and
Mhm.
I was really touched when I did leave, even though I was there for just 6 months. I got a lot of messages of just kindness, saying how grateful the
Wow.
people were there, how grateful the people were of my coverage and the time I spent with them, and so Laredo will always have a special place in my heart.
That's really powerful. You can tell when you're able to leave an impact, even if you weren't there for a really long time, like you said, 6 months, and people are telling you and how thankful they are, what the impact you made. Because I think it can be really easy for people when you're trying to develop your career path, go on to the next level, and and people can tell you're just passing through,
Exactly.
and that you're just like they're just on the sidelines watching you. But I could tell that was very different for you, that even though you knew where you wanted to go, you were still very much present in the community and like connected with that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's a huge part of what journalism is, right? You can have your big aspirations, but without any stop you have to pour into the community, because that's where the stories are, right? And I think that really ties into the theme of your show, like leadership. You have to know what your community is, who your audience is, so to speak, who you're reaching out to, who you're communicating to, or who you're trying to reach. And so that's a big part of the job. Like, the better you do, the more in touch with the community your stories are. Like, a lot of your best story ideas will come from talking to people in the community, hearing what they want to hear about, right? Like, at the end of the day, like, as a news organization, you want to be able to make money, right? But you to make the most money, like, you need the best stories, and to get the best stories, you need to be in touch with the community. So it all kind of works hand in hand.
Yeah, I'm really glad you tied that back into leadership and the community, and really understanding your audience as well. And I think that's a perfect transition to talk about the audience that you're developing with Pinnacle Code. So I want to, because I think it's really intentional and important that even you talked about highlighting high achievers in the Black community outside of athletes and entertainers. And so I'm interested in why you chose to go that route, especially for you as someone who talks to a lot of Black athletes.
Yeah.
I sense a lot of intentionality there. So kind of talk me through how Pinnacle Code was created and the why behind who you are reaching out to.
Yeah, it stems from a personal foundation, like just my experiences growing up. I didn't see high achievers, so to speak, in that looks like me outside of athletes and entertainers. That's all we see in the media. Even just with my experience, specifically growing up in like the suburbs of Seattle, like that's the perception of Black people too. Like it's like you're only in certain rooms, or you're only here to be to do one of those two things. Like, even just going to college in Portland too. I went to college at the University of Portland in Oregon, okay. and I'm not very tall. Like, I'm a 5'8" guy, and I remember there are actually two experiences I want to tell. One, there was a girl who just like came up to me, and she was like, "Oh, are you on the basketball team?" It's like, I'm 5'8". This is a Division I athletic school. Like, I'm like, what are you doing? And then there was another time where I remember it was like a Friday. I was in one of the halls, on one of the academic halls on campus, and this girl, she's like holding the door for me. So I kind of, picked up the pace just, to thank her. And she was like, again, she was like, "Are you on the basketball team?" And I was like, "No." I said no. And then she was like, I can never tell.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's like, not only as a Black person, Black youth growing up in America, not only are you only seeing people look like you succeed at the highest levels in sports and entertainment, but it's shaped the entire perception of what Black people are capable of. Like, that we're only capable of doing these things. And so, so that's why I'm doing Pinnacle Code, to show the brilliance that we have, that the heights that we're achieving in various fields outside of sports and entertainment. And even me, just being in close proximity to Black athletes, knowing some of the great things that they're doing outside of their job, right? Like, as business people, as investors, as doing philanthropic work, doing all these different things. And so I think for me, I felt really called to start a platform like Pinnacle Code, to start changing the narrative. I think most importantly, changing the way that as Black youth we can see ourselves, because I think it's really interesting how it doesn't really matter. And maybe you could speak to this as well. Like, it doesn't really matter what environment in the US you're growing up in as a Black person, whether you come from the suburbs like me, or maybe you come from a lower socioeconomic background growing up in the inner city. Like, those are still, it doesn't matter how many resources you have or whatever. It's like still the only way that society tells you can succeed is doing these things. And so that's why I wanted to start Pinnacle Code. And for me, just being in the media, kind of having an understanding of how media works and leveraging my skills as a journalist, my reporting skills, my ability to listen, all those things that we've talked about. I wanted to create a platform that shows our brilliance, right? And so that's kind of where Pinnacle Code stems from.
I really like that, because like you said, like whether you're in the suburbs or in the lower socioeconomic status, like I think movies, TV, media has really put Black people in a box as you can run really fast, you're really strong, you're there to entertain, but as far as your mind, your creativity, that's something that you can't bring. And whether that's intentional or not, like that could be a whole other podcast episode from like what's happened historically. But I think it's really valuable what you're doing, and it's an aspect of leadership. It's like you're having a vision to have this community and highlight this community that's often lost. Because I think unless you're in that community, and I can kind of relate to it because some of the stuff I do on the nonprofit side, helping people who are historically underrepresented in the STEM fields, because the STEM fields, like it can be hard at times, and there's really not a lot of Black and brown people in those fields, because they think that the best way to get out of poverty and to be rich is to become an athlete, is to become an entertainer.
Exactly.
Which it's a percentage of a percentage of a percentage of people who ever make it. Not to say that you can't make it, but there are other ways to do it. So like my focus has been on STEM and then in entrepreneurship, but I really resonate with what you're doing. So I was when you reached out about kind of doing like a collaboration between our podcasts, I was like, I think that what you're doing really, it fits perfectly in the leadership aspect, because you're creating a new path, a new way of doing things that is not one that people are often seeing. Exactly,
Paul. And just kind of going back to like what you're saying about kind of intentional or not, as we've talked about, like our youth are kind of being funneled to believe that it's either sports or entertainment. It's like, then it's like it's really interesting, because not only is there like only a limited number of jobs like in those fields, right? Like you have to be so exceptional to be like, there are 400 players in the NBA, and every Black kid, I'm over exaggerating, but all the Black kids, are growing up wanting to be in the NBA, all the millions of us, and there are only 400 spots. It's like we're focused on the wrong things, because and this has just come through research I've done, is like sports and entertainment make up such a small percentage of the pie as well. Like being a Black, from my experience, just being a Black person, growing up in the US as a Black person, like it feels like sports and entertainment is so big, but when you look at the macro, like it only makes up, I believe, like between the sports, entertainment, and the arts, it's only like 3 or 4% of the US GDP.
Wow.
Like not only are Black people fighting for millions of Black people fighting for a limited number of jobs, but it's like we're fighting for a small piece. we're fighting for one small slice of the pie, right? There's a much bigger pie that we're not even looking at, right? Like, I think it's healthcare or something that makes up like 30% of the US GDP, like STEM, wow, which you're heavily involved in, is where there's probably the most growth opportunity just because of where the world is going with AI and technology. And as you've mentioned, there aren't a whole lot of people who look like us in those fields, but we're not, from a media standpoint, we're not seeing ourselves in those fields. And so we don't even think to look at it. Right. And so that kind of goes back to like this gap that I'm trying to bridge from a media exposure standpoint, because media is maybe the most powerful force in the world because it shapes how we see ourselves. Yeah. Right. That could be from a positive way we look at ourselves, or from a negative way that we view ourselves, and how other people look at us. That kind of goes back to what I was saying at the University of Portland, the two experiences I had, because what we've shown just Americans about what Black people can do, it's like, okay, they're only in these rooms because these one or two things. And so it's a really big, a really complex issue, but I'm trying to tackle it in my own way. Again, just using just my knowledge of the media space and just my experiences as a journalist, to kind of help the issue in my own way.
Yeah, that's really powerful to use the experiences you have, the knowledge you have, to give back to this community that you are a part of. Because I think it can be really easy because we're relatively young in our careers, to just focus on what I need to do to be successful and just continue to do that. But there's this whole idea of lifting as we climb. And I think more people could do that. I think some people get to a stage where they feel like they've done everything and then they start to do it. I think it's special where you're still earlier on, or not necessarily early on, but you're still younger and there's still time to do a lot of stuff, but you're still taking the effort to build these communities. And that's why I'm so passionate about the stuff I do in the STEM space, because I realize that a lot of times I am the only Black person in my job or in my department, and there's not a lot of people that look like me. And sometimes it can feel like a heavy responsibility, but more so I look at it as an opportunity to show others that this is something that you can do. Because sometimes people ask me, because I do stuff in podcasting, the nonprofit, I work full time. Like, are you doing this because you don't want to work full time anymore? And the more I think about it, I enjoy what I do, and I enjoy being able to be that face, that representation for people, for Black men and women, to say that this is something that Paul's doing. This is something that's possible. I don't only have to do this. I can still do the creative side in podcasting or speaking, but I can also do it as an engineer or in science. So to kind of be on both sides of it, and you're doing a similar thing on the media side, but also having your own platform as well. And I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And I think for me at some point, like I want Pinnacle Code to become a global platform, and I don't know how that's going to work right now. That's kind of the goal, right? Yeah. And I'm working towards that. But at the same time, like you said, with your field of just being an engineer, like you enjoy what you do, and I genuinely love what I do, telling the stories of these athletes, being around the game, being in the locker room, building these relationships, leveraging all the skills that I've talked about, my God-given talents, so to speak. And yeah, maintaining, like, you can have this career, but also build up your own platform on the side. And I think that's so important to do, whether you look at it as a side hustle, whether you want to go all in on it at some point in the future. Yeah. I think it's really important, for people that look like us to understand that you don't need to be boxed in, right? Yes. you can be your full authentic self in different avenues. And just for people like you and me that happens to, at this stage in our lives, having our own career, but also building up our own communities, our own platforms on the side. And yeah, for me, I want to build maximum leverage, and in that, rise as high as I can just in my career, covering the NFL, but also building a global platform, and then getting to a point to where I have what would be like a good problem to have. Like, do I want to just go all in on Pinnacle Code or whatever form it takes in the future, or just kind of keep it to the scale I have it as I just kind of continue to do my job reporting. So yeah, again, like I think it's just important for us to not be boxed in, because I think in a lot of ways society makes it feel like that we have to be boxed in, even if it may not be so an active boxing in, but you almost feel the pressures. Just kind of just do this. And so I think what we're both doing is really important, and for people that look like us to see what we're doing as well.
Yeah, and society has a tendency to just box you in and just make you choose. But it's like, there's very rare anything in life that's just black and white. There's a whole lot of gray. And I do believe that you will make the Pinnacle Code a global platform. I can already tell from your passion and your vision. So I'm just speaking into existence right now, like this recorded podcast, July 2024, that it's not a global platform now, but it will be in the future because of the vision you already have. So I think a lot of people, when they're creating stuff, excuse me, they don't think that far ahead as far as how big they want it to be. And I think a lot of the skills that you're already doing as a journalist, as someone in the media, tie directly into what you're doing with the Pinnacle Code. So I don't think you're leaving one thing for another. I think it's just a shifting of, instead of working for a platform, you're working for your own platform and building that out. So I think the synergies are there.
Yeah, and that kind of goes to what we were talking about earlier, just in terms of society, whether intentional or not, like the images we see. I think it's so important, just being a Black person, to have a platform to where I can see, and other people can see people who look like me succeeding in all these varieties of fields. Because in the US context, in the Western context, people who look like us don't control the narrative, so to speak, right? And when you don't, and because of that, we're letting people who don't look like us, who don't come from the same experiences that we come from, shape how we see the world, how our kids see the world. And so I think it's really important for me, wherever Pinnacle Code goes, to have a platform just from our perspective, right? And showing the diversity of success just in that manner. And so I think that's another big reason why I'm so motivated too, because I don't know how much you follow like the Earn Your Leisure platform.
Yeah.
And there's a guy within that 19 Keys who's has his own show, High Level Conversations. Like he talks so much, and I agree 100% how like Black people, we largely dictate like how culture goes, right? And what's cool, what's not, just in terms of music and everything. But we don't control any of that, right? It's the white man or whoever that controls it. And so I think for me, having a platform that we control is super important. So that's I'm really motivated by that, and looking at people like Tyler Perry, who's been able this media empire that he's been able, like Tyler Perry Studios in Atlanta, this massive studio that's like the size of like a Paramount, owned by a black man.
Yeah.
The only one of its kind in the U.S. What Oprah has been able to do, what Byron Allen has been able to do. He's, there, all these these broadcast conglomerates, they own a lot of these major networks, right? But Byron Allen, right, like he owns the Weather Channel. he owns like that's crazy. But we need to normalize that, right?
Yes.
And so I think those are some of my idols. And so that all kind of ties into why I'm doing what I'm doing.
So that's really powerful. And I know we could go on, but we're almost out of time. But I want to make sure people know how to, actually, before I do that, is there anything that we haven't talked about yet, whether it's about yourself, Pinnacle Code, a Black community, that you want to talk about before we kind of start to wrap things up?
Yeah, I would say one thing, and this kind of ties into Pinnacle Code and the whole theme of showing the diversity of success in the Black community. Because all of our experiences as people, as Black people, whatever, are different, right? Like you came here from Nigeria and came to the US. My family is from Ghana, but I was born here. And for me, like success may look different than just a different like Black American, right? Like I'm second generation, right? And so for me, it's like my whole life, I've always felt like I've been in between cultures because my family is from Ghana. And so I don't have a lot of that context that a lot of Black Americans who grew up here, their family's been here generations.
Yeah.
I can't necessarily relate to that. Mm-hmm. But then at the same time, I don't necessarily always relate to my family in Ghana because they see me as American. So my whole life, I've always felt like I've been in between cultures, right? I was born in America, but my family is from Ghana. And so for me, I always felt like I maybe necessarily didn't fit in, right? And so I think because of that, and I think that's why we're so aligned too, because your whole idea is about kind of maximizing personal growth, being the most incredible version of yourself. And for me, it's like the maximization of your potential of who you are, right? Like I am not your typical Ghanaian. I'm not your typical Black American. Like what success looks like to me is different than anyone else. So it's important for me to maximize who I am in my authentic way, whatever that looks like. And so that ties into Pinnacle Code, what I'm doing with that, but also your platform, but also, but yeah, that's who I want to embody, like being an example of, like he did it his way, right? Like you can reach the highest levels while being yourself.
Yes.
And so I think I think that'd be kind of my last message. And I think it's kind of important for people to hear.
Absolutely. Reaching the highest levels by being yourself. I think that's a bar in itself, because I think a lot of times we can get caught up in looking at different people or idols and trying to emulate them, which I think it's good to have something to look through as a framework. But at the end of the day, like, I know you talk about your God-given gifts, and I'm a person of faith, and I honestly believe that God gives it different gifts, and we don't want to try and be someone else. Like, we want to be our true selves, and whatever that means. And I believe that's really something only God can reveal to you. Mm-hmm. And it just really takes stepping out in faith and just going and doing stuff. And also I talk about that just because you have a talent or a gift doesn't mean that you don't have to work hard at something. I think if anything, it means it's your responsibility to work harder, because you're going to just, if someone else is doing the same thing and you're doing it, but you have a gift, you're going to surpass them with the same amount of time. And so it's important to understand that with your talents or gifts, to keep putting in that work, and then also understand that it will it will reap a reward. It will be successful. And it may not always look like it, but it will be successful. And kind of what you were saying is to define what your success looks like, because the world and people are going to be like, this is what you should be doing, or this is what you'll be doing. Oh, you don't have $1 million house, you're not successful, or you don't have 5 kids or whatever. And if we've learned anything from famous people, entertainers, it's like you can have all the seemingly worldly things in the world and be miserable.
Exactly.
So you need to define what success looks like and not look at other people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a bar. I agree 100%, Paul. I agree 100%.
But yeah, it's been incredible having you on on the show, talking about your experiences in Laredo, Texas, covering everything from the AAA team to high school teams, golf, all of that. And then really only there 6 months. And I still can't believe how you were able to transition and grow that quickly, and then started working with the Seahawks. And Russell Wilson, like everything he stands for, I'm a huge fan of him, getting to interview him, the Pete Carrolls of the world. We didn't even get to talk about what you do right now with in Nashville and AFC South, but that's just so many layers to you.
Maybe a part two for later. Yeah.
Yeah, we might need a part 2, because I think we talked about the last several years and not the most current. But really, I'm glad we got to talk more about the why of the Pinnacle Code and really shaping the narrative to show that as Black people, we are much more than entertainers and athletes. We are creatives. We are people in STEM. We are people who can do a lot more than the 3% slice of the pie, the GDP that you were mentioning. We can be in healthcare, all these different things. But so that was a little bit about what you shared. But I want to make sure that people can stay connected with you. If you can share about you, the podcast, all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. So to tap in with Pinnacle Code, you could go to at Pinnacle _code on Instagram, and at Pinnacle Code on YouTube and TikTok for the show. And then as far as my work as covering the NFL for Fox Sports, you can go to foxsports.com and go to the personalities tab, and then you click on that, and all my videos and all my stories will show up there. But on social media, I'm on X at Ben Y. Arthur, one word, and the same on Instagram as well. So yeah, that's where people can find me.
Awesome. Well, Ben, it's been great having you on the show. Like, you are really, truly an example of an incredible leader, like really transforming and creating a new space. I think it's a lot of people want to just work for someone else or try to develop something, which, not to say that you're not working for someone else, you're doing that with Fox Sports, but it takes a special person to see something as an opportunity and walk in it. And so for those of you who have been listening or watching the show, I hope you learned something from Ben's story, that really don't be afraid to look for opportunities to do something outside of your day-to-day job, and have the vision to make something bigger than maybe you would ever imagine. And you can truly be incredible.
Be sure to rate and review this podcast on your favorite podcast listening platform. We'll see you here next time. And be incredible.